Take this and go get rid of that burden you're carrying in your belly. And when you're done, get out of this house and never come back." My mother-in-law Isabella's voice was as sharp and cold as steel on a winter night. It had been less than a week since my husband had died. The dirt on his grave was still fresh, and she was already throwing a wad of cash and the address of a women's health clinic in my face. I stood paralyzed, my feet rooted to the cold tiled floor of the house that until a few weeks ago I had called my home. In my ears, the echo of her heart-wrenching wails during the funeral still seemed to resonate. But now in front of me was not a mother who had just lost her beloved son. It was someone else. A stranger of incredible cruelty. My trembling hand instinctively rested on my 4-month belly, where Alex's and my first child was growing. The only seed he had left in this world was growing day by day, and she called it a burden. Just over a week ago, my life was a picture-perfect dream that any young woman would desire. My name is Sophia Miller. I'm 29 years old, and I teach kindergarten in a quiet town in Oregon's Willamette Valley. My days were filled with finger painting, story time, and the innocent laughter of 5-year-olds. It was a simple life, but it was mine, and I loved it. My life truly changed when I met Alex Thompson. He was a civil engineer who had come to my town for a project his company was managing. We met at a community fundraiser at the local library. I was running the children's book sale table, and he bought an entire box of Dr. Seuss books, claiming he wanted to donate them to a school in the next county. That's when I knew he was special. He was mature, kind, with a warmth in his words that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. He asked me out for coffee the next day, and we talked for 4 hours straight. He said he loved my tenderness, my authenticity, my smile, and the patience with which I treated children. He told me stories about building bridges and designing structures that would last generations, and I told him about teaching children to read their first words. We dated for 18 months before he proposed. The day he asked me to marry him, on a hiking trail overlooking the valley at sunset, my family cried with joy. My parents are just farmers, vintners to be exact, who have worked hard their whole lives, wanting only a good husband and a safe harbor for their daughter. And Alex, in everyone's eyes, was the strongest harbor imaginable. My mother-in-law Isabella also seemed to appreciate me very much at first. The first time I went to her brownstone in New York City, a beautiful 4-story building in the Upper East Side, she held my hand for a long time, endlessly praising how beautiful and good I was. She wore an elegant silk blouse and pearl earrings, and her home smelled of expensive potpourri and old money. She said her family wanted for nothing, only a virtuous daughter-in-law who knew how to care for the home. She even told me to consider her as my own mother, to tell her anything without hesitation. She showed me photo albums of Alex as a child, told me stories about his father who had passed away when Alex was in college, and made me feel like I was already part of the family. And I believed her. I naively believed I was incredibly fortunate. I thought the good fortune of my ancestors had allowed me to find a wonderful family-in-law. Our wedding was celebrated with everyone's blessings. It was a beautiful autumn ceremony at a historic estate in the Hudson Valley. Isabella spared no expense, insisting on paying for everything. The flowers alone cost more than my parents' annual income. I felt like a princess, and Alex looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. I followed Alex to the city to live in a spacious apartment in Brooklyn that he said was a wedding gift from his parents. It had exposed brick walls, tall windows with views of the bridge, and hardwood floors that gleamed in the morning light. My life in the following days was filled with happiness. Alex loved and pampered me to the extreme, knowing I was new to the city. He took me out every weekend, showing me every street, every corner of the boroughs. We'd get bagels in the morning, walk through Central Park, visit museums, and eat at tiny restaurants in neighborhoods I'd never heard of. He never let me do heavy chores. He always said a teacher's hands were for caring for children, not for arduous tasks. When I told him the news of my pregnancy 4 months ago, he hugged me tightly, spinning me around the living room until I was dizzy and laughing. He would press his ear to my belly every night, whispering words of love to the child not yet fully formed. "My little one, you're going to love this world," he'd say softly. "Your mama and I are going to show you everything beautiful in it." That moment, I thought I was the happiest woman in the world. But happiness, I learned, can be fleeting. The storm arrived on a fateful afternoon in late September. Alex said he had to leave suddenly for a construction site in the Rocky Mountains, somewhere near Boulder, Colorado. There was an issue with the foundation of a bridge they were building, and as the lead structural engineer, he needed to be there personally. He promised he would be back in 5 days, a week at most. I ironed every shirt for him, packed his favorite snacks, and told him to be careful on the road. He kissed my forehead, placed both hands on my belly, and said, "Take care of our little one. I'll be back before you know it." But just 2 days later, at 3:15 in the afternoon, I received a call from his company. The voice on the other end was shaking. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry. There's been an accident." They said the SUV he was traveling in with several colleagues had been in an accident coming down a mountain pass during a sudden snowstorm. The vehicle went off the road and tumbled down an embankment. No one had survived. My entire world collapsed in that instant. The phone fell from my hands and clattered on the kitchen floor. I remember the sound it made, a sharp crack against the tile, and then nothing. Everything after that was a blurry mess of tears and heart-wrenching pain. I don't remember how I got to the accident site in Colorado. I don't remember the flight, the rental car, or the drive through the mountains. I only remember the moment they asked me to identify his body. They led me into a cold room that smelled of antiseptic and death, and pulled back a white sheet. It was him. My Alex. His face was peaceful, almost like he was sleeping, but there was a gash across his forehead and his skin was too pale, too cold. I touched his hand and it felt like marble. That's when I fainted. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed in Denver. The harsh fluorescent lights made my eyes ache. At my side, my mother-in-law was sobbing, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. She grabbed my hand when she saw my eyes open. "Sophia, Alex is truly gone. How are you and I going to live now?" That moment, despite my own devastating grief, I felt some comfort. I thought that in the midst of this tragedy, at least I had my mother-in-law by my side. Someone to lean on. Someone who understood the magnitude of this loss. I was so wrong. Alex's funeral was held 3 days later at a beautiful cemetery in Westchester County. It was a gray October morning, the kind where the sky seems to press down on you with the weight of all the world's sorrow. There were hundreds of people, colleagues from his firm, friends from college, distant relatives I'd never met. I was like a ghost, moving through the ceremony in a fog of grief. I only knew how to kneel by his coffin, my hand pressed against the polished wood, crying until I had no tears left. I wore a black dress that was already getting tight around my middle, and I kept my hand on my belly, as if protecting our baby from the terrible reality of a world without his father. Isabella stood beside me during the service, veiled and elegant in her grief. She gave a beautiful eulogy about her only son, her voice breaking in all the right places. She spoke of his childhood, his accomplishments, his kindness. She even mentioned me, saying how happy Alex had been since we married. I thought, through my tears, that perhaps we would help each other through this. 2 women who had loved the same man, bound together by our shared loss. But as soon as the last guests left the brownstone after the reception, when only immediate family remained in the house, my mother-in-law changed. The transformation was so sudden and complete that I wondered if I'd imagined the loving woman from before. She was no longer crying. She sat on the velvet sofa in the living room and looked at me with an unfamiliar coldness. Her eyes, which had been red and swollen moments before, were now dry and calculating. She began to blame and reproach me. "You were a bad omen," she said, her voice flat and hard. "Ever since my son married you, his business started to go downhill. And look, now he's lost his life, leaving me, a poor widow, all alone." I was stunned, unable to believe what I was hearing. The words felt like physical blows. I tried to speak, to defend myself, to understand what was happening. "Isabella, I don't understand. What are you saying?" Alex's career was going well. He was happy. We were happy. She cut me off with a sharp gesture of her hand. Happy? Don't be naive. He told me he felt trapped. That he'd made a mistake marrying a simple farm girl. That you were holding him back from his true potential. The lies were so brazen, so cruel that I couldn't even process them. My grief-addled mind struggled to make sense of this sudden attack. She stood up, walking to a mahogany cabinet and pulled out a stack of papers. She threw them on the coffee table in front of me. This is the deed to this house, she said. And this is the title to the apartment you've been living in. Both are in my name. Alex never owned anything. Everything was mine, held in trust for him. I looked at the documents, my vision blurring with fresh tears. That couldn't be right. Alex had told me the apartment was a wedding gift from his parents. He'd said it was ours. From now on, Isabella continued, I manage everything. The house, the money, all of it. You have no claim to anything. But I'm his wife, I whispered. I'm carrying his child. She looked at my belly with open disgust. That changes nothing. In fact, it makes everything worse. She walked to the front door and pulled my coat from the closet. She threw it at me. You can stay here for now, she said. But you'll earn your keep. You'll do all the housework, the cleaning, the cooking. And you'll keep that pregnancy quiet. I don't want anyone knowing about it yet. I stared at her, shocked into silence. This couldn't be happening. This had to be grief making her irrational. Isabella, please, I said, my voice breaking. I know you're hurting. I'm hurting too. But we need each other right now. We're family. She laughed, a cold, brittle sound. Family? You were never family. You were a mistake my son made that I have to clean up. In the following days, Isabella's cruelty only intensified. She had been right about one thing, she did make me earn my keep. I was forced to do all the housework in her massive brownstone, cleaning, washing, cooking for the relatives and friends who came to offer condolences. My pregnancy made everything harder. The morning sickness, the fatigue, the emotional exhaustion of grieving while being treated like a servant in what should have been my home. But I gritted my teeth and swallowed my tears, consoling myself that I had to be strong for the child in my womb, for the only bloodline Alex had left. At meals, Isabella would only give me stale bread and water, while she and her guests ate the elaborate dishes I'd prepared. Once, when I reached for a piece of chicken, she slapped my hand away. A parasitic woman like you is lucky to have anything to put in her mouth, she hissed. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run back to Oregon, to my parents' simple farmhouse, to safety. But I had no money. I'd given up my teaching job to move to New York with Alex. Our joint bank account was in both our names, but when I tried to access it online, I discovered Isabella had somehow gotten herself added to the account and had transferred everything out. I had nothing. I was trapped. And then the height of cruelty came on a cold November morning, exactly 1 week after Alex's funeral. I was in the kitchen, scrubbing pots from the previous night's dinner when Isabella came downstairs. She was already dressed, her hair perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless. She placed an envelope on the counter next to me. Inside was a thick stack of $100 bills. I counted later and found it was $10,000, and a slip of paper with an address. I looked up at her, confused. What is this? Her face was impassive. That's the address of a women's health clinic in Manhattan. They're expecting you this afternoon at 2 o'clock. The money should cover the procedure and give you enough to get back to wherever you came from. My blood ran cold. Procedure? Don't play stupid, she said. You're going to terminate that pregnancy. Then you're going to leave this house and never come back. My hand flew to my belly, protective and instinctive. No. No, I won't do that. This is Alex's baby. This is your grandchild. That thing, she said, pointing at my stomach with disgust, is not my grandchild. It's a burden. A reminder of a mistake. And I won't have it in my family. I felt the walls closing in around me. The grief, the abuse, the isolation, it had all been building to this moment. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted to erase every trace of my existence, including the innocent life growing inside me. You can't make me do this, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I'm an adult. This is my child. Isabella's eyes narrowed. You have nothing. No job, no money, no home. How exactly do you plan to raise a child? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Take the money, get rid of the burden, and disappear. Or I'll make your life so miserable you'll wish you'd never been born. I looked at the envelope, at the cold cash and the even colder address. Something inside me broke in that moment, but it wasn't my will. It was my fear. I picked up the envelope. Isabella smiled, thinking she'd won. But I didn't say a word. I simply walked upstairs to the small room I'd been sleeping in, grabbed the single suitcase I'd brought from Oregon, and packed my few belongings. 15 minutes later, I was standing on the front steps of the brownstone with my suitcase in one hand and the envelope in the other. Isabella stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, satisfaction written across her face. Don't ever come back, she said. You were never good enough for my son, and you never will be. She slammed the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt click into place. I stood there on East 74th Street in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the world, homeless and pregnant, with a dead husband and a monster for a mother-in-law. The November wind cut through my thin coat. People walked past me on the sidewalk, well-dressed men and women with shopping bags and purpose, and no one gave me a second glance. I had never felt so alone in my entire life. For several minutes, I just stood there, unable to move. The grief of losing Alex, the shock of Isabella's cruelty, the fear for my baby's future, it all crashed over me like a wave, and I thought I might drown in it. But then my baby moved. It was the first time I'd really felt it, a tiny flutter like a butterfly's wings against the inside of my belly. And in that moment, something shifted. My child was depending on me. I couldn't fall apart. I had to fight. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. I had exactly 4 contacts I could call. My parents, my best friend from college who lived in Seattle, and the principal of the school where I taught in Oregon. But I didn't call any of them. Not yet. 'Cause calling them would mean admitting defeat. It would mean running home with my tail between my legs, proving Isabella right that I wasn't strong enough for this world. Instead, I did something else. I opened my phone's browser and typed, Women's Legal Aid New York City. A list of results appeared. I clicked on the first one, the Women's Justice Center located in Lower Manhattan. Their website said they provided free legal services to women in crisis, specializing in family law, estate law, and protection orders. I looked at the address Isabella had given me. The clinic was on the Upper East Side, probably a 15-minute walk from where I stood. But the Women's Justice Center was downtown, probably 45 minutes by subway. I made my choice. I flagged down a taxi. The Women's Justice Center was located in a modest building in the financial district, sandwiched between a deli and a dry cleaner. The lobby was small but clean, with worn chairs and inspirational posters about women's rights on the walls. A receptionist sat behind a plexiglass window. I walked up, my suitcase rolling behind me, and I must have looked like exactly what I was, a desperate woman with nowhere else to turn. Can I help you? The receptionist asked. She was a kind-looking woman in her 50s with graying hair and gentle eyes. I need a lawyer, I said, and then, to my mortification, I burst into tears. She came around the window and put her arm around me. "'Kay, honey. It's okay. Come sit down." She led me to a chair and brought me a box of tissues and a cup of water. I tried to compose myself, but the tears wouldn't stop. All the fear and grief and anger I'd been holding in for the past week came pouring out. Through a few minutes, a woman emerged from a hallway. She was in her late 30s, dressed in a simple pantsuit with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had the look of someone who'd seen it all and wouldn't be shocked by anything. I'm Margaret Chen, she said, extending her hand. I'm a family law attorney here. Why don't you come back to my office and tell me what's going on? I followed her down a narrow hallway to a small office crammed with file boxes and law books. She gestured for me to sit in a chair across from her cluttered desk. Take your time, she said. Start from the beginning. And so I did. I told her everything, about Alex, about his death, about Isabella's sudden cruelty, about the money and the clinic address, about being thrown out with nowhere to go. Margaret listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. First of all, she said, I'm very sorry for your loss. What you're going through is traumatic, and what your mother-in-law is doing is not only cruel, it's potentially illegal. My heart leaped. Illegal? Margaret nodded. Let's start with the basics. You were legally married to Alex Thompson at the time of his death, correct? Yes. We were married for 8 months. And you're pregnant with his child? Yes. 4 months along. Margaret wrote something down. Okay. That means you are entitled to several things under New York law. First, as his widow, you have rights to his estate. Did he have a will? I don't know, I admitted. He never mentioned one. That's actually good for you, Margaret said. If he died intestate without a will, then under New York law, you as his spouse are entitled to $50,000 plus half of his estate. The other half would go to his child when born. But Isabella said everything was in her name, I said. She said Alex never owned anything. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Did she show you documentation of this? She showed me some papers, I said, trying to remember. The deed to her house and the title to our apartment. They both had her name on them. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, Margaret said. Many assets can be held in trust or have multiple owners. We'd need to do a full investigation of his financial records, death certificate, insurance policies, everything. She leaned forward. Here's what I need you to understand, Sophia. Your mother-in-law cannot legally force you to have an abortion. She cannot coerce you into leaving. And if your husband had any assets, life insurance, retirement accounts, property, anything, you have legal rights to them as his widow. What about the joint bank account? I asked. We had about $47,000 in it. I tried to check it online and it's empty. Margaret's expression darkened. When did you last see money in that account? The day before Alex died. I checked our balance that morning. We were saving for a house. And now it's empty? Completely. Margaret wrote furiously. That's potentially theft. If she transferred money out of a joint account without your permission after her son's death, that's a crime. For the first time since Alex died, I felt a spark of something other than grief and fear. I felt hope. Can you help me? I asked. Margaret looked at me directly. Yes, but I need to be honest with you, this is going to be a fight. Women like Isabella Thompson, wealthy women with resources and connections, don't give up easily. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my baby, about Alex, about everything I'd lost and everything I still had to protect. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready to fight. Good, Margaret said, and she actually smiled. Then here's what we're going to do. Over the next 2 hours, Margaret laid out a plan. First, we would file for emergency protection of assets, freezing any accounts that might have Alex's name on them. Second, we would request all financial documents related to Alex's estate, bank statements, insurance policies, property titles, everything. Third, we would send Isabella a formal cease and desist letter, warning her that any further harassment would result in legal action. But where will I stay tonight? I asked, the practical reality hitting me. I have nowhere to go. Margaret made a phone call. 20 minutes later, she'd arranged for me to stay at a women's shelter in Brooklyn that specialized in helping pregnant women in crisis. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, and they had resources, counseling, job placement assistance, medical care. This is just temporary, Margaret assured me. Once we get access to what's rightfully yours, you'll have options. That night, lying in a narrow bed in a shared room at the shelter, listening to the sounds of the city through the thin walls, I finally allowed myself to think clearly. I pulled out the envelope Isabella had given me and counted the money. $10,000. It was meant to be payment for erasing my child from existence. Instead, I decided it would be the seed money for my survival and my fight back. The next morning, I opened a new bank account in my name only and deposited the cash. Then I met Margaret at her office and we began the real work. Margaret had filed the emergency motions overnight. She was incredible, fierce, thorough, and absolutely relentless. Within 48 hours, we had results. First, we discovered that Alex had a life insurance policy through his company worth $750,000. The beneficiary was listed as spouse, meaning me. Isabella had known about this policy but had never told me, probably hoping I'd disappear before I found out. Second, we found out that the Brooklyn apartment wasn't in Isabella's name alone, it was jointly owned by her and Alex. Under New York law, joint tenancy meant that when one owner died, their share automatically went to the surviving owner. But because Alex was married at the time of his death, there were complications. I had a legal claim. Third, and most damaging to Isabella, we discovered that she had transferred $63,000 out of our joint bank account the day after Alex's funeral, money that legally belonged to me as the joint account holder. Margaret called me with the news. I was sitting in the shelter's common room, and I had to step outside to take the call because my hands were shaking so badly. "We have her," Margaret said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. She committed theft and fraud. "I'm filing a police report today." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Margaret said, "we go on the offensive." The letter arrived at Isabella's brownstone 3 days later, delivered by a process server. It was a formal legal demand: return the stolen funds within 72 hours, provide full documentation of Alex's estate, and cease all contact with me immediately. Failure to comply would result in criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. I wasn't there when Isabella received it, but Margaret's investigator was watching the house. He said Isabella came out onto the front steps, read the letter, and her face went white. She crumpled the paper in her fist and stormed back inside. She didn't respond within 72 hours. So we filed the lawsuit and the criminal complaint. The next week was a whirlwind. Margaret worked tirelessly, and I spent my days at the shelter attending counseling sessions, seeing the shelter's doctor for prenatal care, and slowly, carefully putting the pieces of my life back together. I also called my parents. I'd been avoiding it, ashamed and afraid of their reaction. But I couldn't hide anymore. Mom answered on the second ring. "Sophia. Honey, we've been so worried. How are you holding up?" I told them everything. The whole terrible story. And to my surprise, they didn't scold me or say, "I told you so." They just listened. And when I finished, my father said simply, "Do you need us to come there?" "Not yet," I said. "But I might soon." "We're here," my mother said. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it. You're our daughter and we love you. Always." I cried, but this time they were tears of gratitude. 2 weeks after we filed the lawsuit, Isabella's attorney contacted Margaret. He wanted to negotiate. Isabella was willing to return some of the money and provide documentation in exchange for dropping the criminal charges. Margaret called me. "What do you want to do?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Isabella punished, to watch her face consequences. But another part of me, the part that was growing wiser and stronger every day, knew that my energy was better spent building a future than fighting the past. Tell them I'll drop the criminal charges if she returns every cent she took, provides full documentation of Alex's assets, and relinquishes any claim to the life insurance or the Brooklyn apartment, I said. And I wanted in writing that she will never contact me or my child again. Margaret smiled. Done. The settlement was finalized 3 weeks later. Isabella returned the $63,000, plus an additional $25,000 she'd apparently taken from Alex's personal savings account that we hadn't even known about. She provided all the documentation we needed to claim the life insurance. And she signed an agreement permanently severing her legal relationship with me and my child. In total, I received nearly $800,000, the life insurance, the returned funds, and Alex's half of the Brooklyn apartment, which we sold immediately. I never saw Isabella again. But I heard, through Margaret's connections, that she was humiliated in her social circles when word got out about the lawsuit. Her friends discovered she'd tried to cheat her pregnant daughter-in-law out of her rightful inheritance, and apparently that was beyond the pale even for the Upper East Side set. By the time my son was born, on a warm day in late April, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces with Alex's dark hair in my eyes, I had moved back to Oregon. Not to my parents' farm, but to a beautiful house I'd purchased in the same town where I used to teach. It had a nursery with windows facing the mountains and a garden where I planned to plant vegetables and flowers. I named my son Alexander after his father, but we called him Xander. I returned to teaching at the same school, and the principal welcomed me back with open arms. The other teachers threw me a baby shower, and my students made cards welcoming baby Xander to the world. I felt surrounded by love, real love, not the conditional, cruel version Isabella had offered. When Xander was 6 months old, I received a letter. It was from Isabella. Not to me, she was legally barred from contacting me, but to Xander to be opened when he turned 18. I thought about throwing it away. But instead, I put it in a safe deposit box. Someday, when he was old enough to understand, I would let Xander decide if he wanted to know his grandmother's words. But I would also make sure he knew the truth of what she'd done. 2 years after Alex's death, I met someone. His name was James, and he was a widower with a young daughter. He'd lost his wife to cancer, and he understood grief in a way most people couldn't. We met at a parent-teacher conference. His daughter was in my class, and we fell in love slowly, carefully, both of us carrying our scars but willing to try again. James never tried to replace Alex. He honored my son's father and made sure Xander knew about the man who had loved him before he was even born. But he also became a wonderful dad to Xander, patient and kind and present in all the ways that mattered. We married on a fall day, 3 years after Alex's death, in my parents' vineyard. Xander was our ring-bearer, toddling down the aisle with the cushion in his chubby hands. My mother cried happy tears. My father gave the toast. And I realized that this messy, reconstructed, hard-won life was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. 5 years after that terrible November day when Isabella threw me out, I was standing in my kitchen on a Saturday morning. James was making pancakes. Xander, now 5.5, was telling his little sister Emma, James's daughter, whom I'd officially adopted, an elaborate story about dinosaurs. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the finger paints on the refrigerator and the family photos on the walls. My phone rang. It was Margaret Chen. We'd stayed in touch over the years, and she'd become a friend. "Sophia, I thought you should know," she said. "Isabella Thompson passed away last week. Heart attack." I was quiet for a moment, processing. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked gently. I looked at my children laughing at the table, at my husband flipping pancakes and making silly faces. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the grief, the cruelty, the fight, the healing. "I feel sorry for her," I said honestly. She had a chance to know her grandson, to be part of his life, to be loved. And she threw it all away because of pride and prejudice. "That's very gracious of you," Margaret said. "I'm not being gracious," I said. "I'm being honest." She lost. I won. Not because I destroyed her, but because I built something beautiful out of the ashes she tried to leave me in. After I hung up, James put a plate of pancakes in front of me. "Everything okay?" I smiled and kissed him. "Everything's perfect." That night, after the kids were in bed, I went to Xander's room. He was sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling, one arm thrown over his stuffed elephant. I kissed his forehead. Your dad loved you so much, I whispered. And even though he's not here, his love protected you. Protected both of us. In the end, Isabella had been wrong about so many things. She'd been wrong that I was too weak to survive without her family's money. She'd been wrong that I was a burden. And she'd been most wrong about my son. The burden she wanted me to erase had become the greatest blessing of my life, the reason I found strength I never knew I had. I walked back to my bedroom where James was reading and climbed into bed next to him. He put his book down and pulled me close. I thought about that terrified, pregnant widow standing on the steps of a brownstone with nowhere to go. I thought about how she could never have imagined this future, this love, this peace, this joy. Sometimes I realize the worst thing that happens to you cracks you open in exactly the way you need. Breaks you down so you can rebuild yourself stronger, wiser, and more whole than you ever were before. Isabella had tried to destroy me. Instead, she freed me. And that, I thought as I drifted off to sleep in my husband's arms, was the sweetest justice of all.